Welcome back to the show, everyone, for our Valentine's edition. For those who just tuned in, our guest today is Professor Smith. The professor and I will be discussing the challenges in celebrating Valentine's Day amidst an economic crisis. Shall we listen to our first listener on call?
Sure, let's get started.
Baba, wait, I'm on a phone call. Hello? This is the show about the Valentine's Day problems.
Yes, it is.
This is a major problem. How am I supposed to live like this? I've just recently got married to Julie and she's the light of my life. And this is the first Valentine's Day and I want to buy her everything. I want to buy her bags, I want to buy her flowers, I want to buy her shoes. Chocolates, clothes, anything. But how am I supposed to find anything? It's nowhere to be found. Even if I try to go and find something that works, it's so expensive. What am I supposed to do? I can't even get her a bouquet of flowers.
Yes, Professor. What do you exactly have to say about that? Actually, I also feel like that's a problem even I face when I shop online as well. So, what do you exactly have to say about that?
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that. But if you think about, some things you'd commonly buy, if you're looking for, let's say, a particular brand that can only be imported. For example, let's say a bag, or clothes or something like that. These import bans or even any of these trade barriers essentially can affect your day-to-day life by restricting your choice. And now let's say you're finally able to even find something you like. Most often than not, these are subject to multiple tariffs. Let's take, for example, the flowers you were talking about, commonly given flowers such as roses. That will be subject to a general duty of 15%, a PAL of 10%, and then after that you have your social security contribution levy of 2.5 and your VAT of 15. So when all of these are added up, obviously even though there is a product, it's only an illusion of choice because it's so expensive, it's more often than not priced out of your range. So all these kind of protectionist measures eventually restrict our choices as consumers on even days like this and, in our day-to-day life.
That's a very tragic outlook on Valentine's Day, it seems, so far. Let's move on to our second listener.
Yeah.
Hi, so I know this is a Valentine's Day show where all these couples are calling in to just share how their Valentine's Day has been affected by this economic crisis. But I think you all should listen to how single people's lives also have been affected by this economic crisis, because I think single lives also matter. So you see, I also want to spend my Valentine's Day nicely sitting on my bed, watching all the movies that I like and everything. But every time I go and sit on the bed and switch on my TV to watch these movies, the power goes. Every single time. I mean, what's happening? I want to just enjoy my Valentine's Day in peace, but the CB keeps on cutting my electricity and I'm really getting annoyed at this point. And on top of that, I also pay a very huge electricity bill and still my power is getting cut. Can't we get out of this?
I fully agree with that. My electricity bills have been doubled these years. But anyway, Professor, what do you have to say about that as well?
Well, this is a bit of a complicated issue. But, if you really dig deep into it, what you would see is that electricity generation has been riddled with so many operating inefficiencies that essentially electricity is being generated in suboptimal ways. And on top of that, you have the CEB that has been running at massive losses and has accumulated so much of debt. And, all of these factors, among others, have kind of compounded and made it so that the cost of generating electricity is so high and inefficient. What we need to do is to restructure the CEB so that there is competition in this area and so that the incentives are aligned, that there will be a cost-effective electricity generation so that essentially us as consumers and our listeners are not burdened with these high costs.
I understand that, yeah. Should we move on to our next listener?
Sure, let's go ahead.
Hello? Hello? I have a big problem. I have been trying to bake butter cake for my lovely wife. It's our tradition. Since we got married, then 40 years I bake a cake for her. But in this government, new price hike of bitter, the egg bitter, I can't find the bitter all over the places. So my problem is, I want to buy eggs. Where can I find the eggs? I need to bake this cake for my wife.
Now, Professor, after hearing that, well, would you like to give him a solution as well?
Well, I really hope he's able to find those eggs and, bake that cake. But essentially, these, shortages, the problem he's facing can be one of the effects when you have price controls. Actually, there was a really good video about the effect of price controls in this, the egg problem, essentially, by Advo, I think. You should check it out as well. It's quite informative. But essentially, what happens is when you have these price controls, they more often than not lead to shortages rather than solve the problem.
Right. That's great insight, actually. Shall we move on to our final caller for the day?
Yep.
Hi, so I was listening to all of these problems and I have an issue of my own, right? So yesterday, my husband and I got into a massive fight and 100% my fault. So I thought to make up for it, I'll take him to a nice restaurant that we go to every single time. But today I walked in to check the prices and my God, it has more than doubled and I don't know what's going on.
All right, ma'am. Firstly, I highly doubt it was 100% of your fault. Moving back into it, Professor.
Well, I can't really comment on whose fault it was. But the problem that they're facing in terms of the rising costs, that's what you would essentially call inflation. And there can be a lot of factors that affect inflation, but one of them is the expansionary monetary policy that was there in 2020. And now, even though this happened in the past, we're seeing the effects of it today, and we've seen it over the last year as well. And what that means is, with the same amount of money, you're essentially able to buy only less goods, or in this case, meals. Now, this might not seem straightforward at first, but it's important that we reduce government deficit. Because when a government runs a deficit, and this one way of doing that is essentially reducing it, is through reducing the government expenses. Because if you're unable to fund this deficit through, let's say, debt, more often than not, you will governments will resort to funding this by printing money. And if this goes unchecked, it could lead to inflationary pressures, which we are seeing now.
Right. I actually understand that better now. Thank you very much, Professor. Do you want to add anything to that, or any remarks you have to say to our listeners?
Well, I think one thing we can take from this is how important it is for all of us to have economic freedom. And the best way to achieve this is through allowing markets to work. For example, like we saw how trade protectionism can affect your choice, and so on and so forth. Because if we are not, if we don't have economic freedom, we can't say that we have freedom of choice. And end of the day, it affects all of us as consumers, and especially on days like this, when we want to give our significant others the best.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor. And thank you for our listeners for tuning in today. And I hope you all have a great Valentine's Day. Thank you, and bye-bye.